All right, so let's flesh out this DJ setup a bit more and just see some other things that can make it a bit more convenient and a bit more exciting. So I have something loaded on the track 1 in a static slot, and I have something loaded on the track 5 in another static slot. My crossfader is assigned to crossfade between the amp volume on both tracks. So far so good. One thing I didn't like though was that when I wanted to play something, I had to go into my grid recording mode and then put down a trig and then quickly remove it before the sequence started over again because I didn't want it to just keep repeating over and over. Now there's a better way to go about that. If we don't intend for these different songs to play repeatedly, we can treat them more like one-shot samples, meaning that we trigger them once and it starts and it won't keep repeating and repeating, or we don't have to delete a trig. It'll just trigger the song and just play from there. Now, in order to do this, we have to go into our pattern settings. So let me get out of here. Make sure I'm not in the grid record mode. If I hold function and edit, this takes me to the different pattern settings. Now we have settings for the entire pattern, and we talked about the scale mode there, but we also have settings per track. Now track 1 and track 5 are essentially my two decks. And if we look over here, so we can see up here it says start silent, but what I'm most concerned with is down here where it says plays free. If we enable plays free, we can essentially disconnect this track from the sequencer. It'll still adhere to the tempo depending on how we trigger that particular sample, but this will also allow us to use the one-shot track mode. Right now it says NA. That option only works if you enable plays free. Now before I do that, I want to point something out. When I enable plays free, if I exit right now, if I press play on track 1, I don't see any playhead moving through the steps here. I see that it's playing, but there's no way to tell where I'm at in the sequence. If I go to a different track that doesn't have that enabled, now I can see the playhead. All right. If I try to trigger this sample somehow, if I press this, nothing happens. All right. In this mode, when you're using plays free, you have to use the first 8 tracks to trigger the audio from the first 8 audio tracks. Well, the only 8 audio tracks. But for this to work, I have to go into the grid recording mode and put a trig on the first step. Otherwise, this is not going to work. So now if I press play, now that trig didn't get triggered. The sequencer is still playing. What it's waiting for me to do now is to press the button that's associated with track 1. So in this case, again, when it's set to plays free, we're dealing with the first 8 buttons here. So T1, I'm going to trigger this. And it waited until the beginning of the pattern. But as we're going through the pattern, it's not constantly playing this over and over again. This is a much easier way for me to trigger that particular sample. Now the nice thing is that if I want to play this again from the top, I can just hit this again, and it's going to wait till the beginning of our pattern. It's going to wait for the 1 in order to trigger this. So let me go ahead and stop that. Let's go back into this area. So plays free has been enabled. After enabling that, the one-shot track has been enabled. So the trig mode, we talked about this when recording, and this functions in a similar way. If it's set to 1, when I trigger that trig, it's going to play the sample associated with it. If I press it again, it's going to play the sample again. If this is set to 1, 2, when I trigger it the first time, it'll play. If I hit the same trig again, it's going to make that sample stop after the track length or after whatever this is set to, trigger quantization. I have this set to the track length so that every time I trigger this one-shot sample, it's going to wait to the beginning of the pattern. It's going to wait for the 1 to play. My pattern is 16 steps long. That's plenty of time for me, and I don't really think I need to play it more often than that. So I have that set up for track 1. I'm going to make sure I set this up for track 5 as well. Go to track 5, turn on plays free, turn on the one-shot track. The trig mode, I want this set to 1. And trig quantization, track length, that's fine. All I have to do now is make sure that I go to the grid record mode and put a trig on the first step. All right, so now let's try this out. I'm going to go ahead and play. So it's playing, nothing's happening yet. If I want to trigger what's on track 1, I just press this button here that says T1. And there we go. So that's playing on the 1. Just to verify that, we can turn on the metronome. Oh, that's right. We started a new project. I don't hear the metronome right now. Let me go ahead and enable that while this is still playing. Function project, control, metronome. And let's just turn that bad boy up some. There we go. All right, so we can hear that's playing on beat. Now when I'm ready to play track 5, I just hit this button here. And we hear that got triggered right on beat. If I press this again, it's gonna start it over. But it's only gonna play as often as every bar. Now, just like I did before, if I want to stop what's playing in track 1, I can just hold T1, press stop. Let me turn my metronome off now. If I scroll over here, now there's nothing playing. So just like we did before, I can go back into my sample slots here for track 1, find something else, hit yes to load that in there. When I'm ready, I can start crossfading over to that. Trigger my one shot. All right, so that's a more efficient way for us to trigger what's happening in track 1 or track 5.